You know, a reunion with Pierre-Luc Dubois was always on the cards, but you probably didn't expect it to happen so early in the season. After avoiding suspension for a bit of a nasty knee-on-knee hit, Dubois and the Kings are in town on Tuesday. We'll dive into what to expect and how the Jets can win on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we just love and appreciate your support. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Now, like I said, obviously this is a big week for Winnipeg, finally getting the season underway. We had our season opener last week, then a break, then the Panthers over the weekend. Jets won that game after losing the the season opener, but you know, sometimes home confines can be a lot friendlier, and so it was against the Panthers. Wasn't a perfect game, but overall, I think through the first two sessions of NHL action for the Jets this year, I'd say I'm feeling pretty good about the team. A lot of what we kind of said on previous shows, you know, a deep forward group with, you know, perhaps a so-so defense, it's seemingly lived up to my expectations. But in other areas, I've been still impressed with how Winnipeg has played overall. So there's a lot to like with this team. I think the Jets are pretty darn good, and they'll get a really fun test on Tuesday against the LA Kings. Now, the Kings haven't exactly had the best of starts to the season. Been a bit of a mixed bag. I think LA is probably not thrilled with having dropped a result already. And, you know, the Kings, they spent big to bring in Dubois. I mean, when you look at the trade package that they offered up for PLD and what they sent to Winnipeg, it wasn't cheap. And I think in a lot of ways, you know, there are huge expectations of this Kings team to take a step forward. And you know what? LA has kind of spent a lot of years retooling, rebuilding, and kind of doing things a bit on the fly. Obviously, LA, you know, no one feels sorry for them, right? They've won championships within the past decade or so. The question for them going forward is, you know, what does this future of this team look like? Is it going to be one where Kopitar continues to be an elite level center? You know, is Dubois supposed to be the number one guy? And, you know, how does Byfield fit into all of this? But in the meantime, obviously this team is still a pain in the butt, even though it's perhaps not the juggernaut it used to be. The Jets are going to face these forward lines. So far, they've got Byfield, Kopitar, and Kempe together, which as a first line is pretty fun. Byfield has, increasingly grown more confident at the NHL level and has started to look more and more like a top 3 pick that he was, you know, projected to be, right? He was taken very high. It was a lottery pick. And, you know, the first year or so was a little bit rough around the edges. But as he gains confidence and starts using his frame more, driving towards the slot and creating offense, I think he's going to be a really fun player. Kopitar, still the ageless wonder. You don't even need to know much about the Kings to know that Kobe has been really the heart and soul of this franchise for however many years he's been there. I mean, it's been ages. It feels like it's been 30 years. I know it's not, obviously, but it does kind of feel like it's been that way. Kempe, of course, is still pretty darn good. A nasty little finisher, kind of one of those guys who was part of the Iafallo group and came up through the ranks from Ontario, if I recall correctly, did pretty well with the Reign, and over the years has really established himself as one of LA's best finishers. Second line is where you're going to see a lot more attention, though. Fiala, Dubois, and Laferriere. Obviously, Dubois is the big fish here because, well, he's a former Jet, and he's probably looking for a bit of a, I guess, revenge session. I really couldn't tell you. He's talked not exactly against, or he's not really spoken against the Jets since arriving in LA, but in so many words, you could tell that he was like, I'm glad that's over with and happy to be with a new team, right? A place that he wants to extend and sign long-term. So Yeah, I expect Jets fans are going to give him a warm welcome with a course of booze, and I would say it's probably not unfair to do that. I liked him a lot as a player, but I am pretty happy now that he's gone. I think the drama is over, and so far, the Jets, what they got back from that deal is looking pretty darn spiffy. As far as the bottom lines are concerned, you've got Trevor Moore, Phil Deneau, and Carl Grunstrom on your third line, and then Jarrett Anderson-Dolan, Blake Lizotti, and Trevor Lewis on your fourth. I actually forgot Trevor was still playing in the NHL. That dude's been around forever. He's even had a cup of coffee with the Jets and was a relatively likable player, but, I don't think anyone particularly remembers his stint that well. This bottom six is the kind that the Jets should kind of roll over, to be honest. I think Winnipeg's all four line sort of situation is looking pretty good, right? Winnipeg's got the forward depth and the skill to overtake a still talented Kings team, but one that I don't think should be a team that scares the Jets. Winnipeg has the forechecking skill, the strength, and the speed and skill to put this Kings roster under a lot of pressure. On defense, you've got Mikey Anderson with Drew Doughty, then Gavrikov with Matt Roy, and then Andreas Englund and Jordan Spence on the third pair. This is a pretty mid-tier defense, I'd say. I think it's probably not that dissimilar from what the Jets are running. I would say Winnipeg's blue line is probably better. Probably. Morrissey and Sandberg are, well, honestly, would probably get into that top four quite easily. Morrissey on the first pairing, of course. Sandberg maybe on the second pair. But yeah, I mean, this blue line, yeah, it's not what it used to be. The Kings were at one point were renowned for having a pretty deep defense. It's definitely declined over the years. And so I just look at this team and I feel like the Jets have a really good opportunity to take 2 points. I think, with Arvidsson out, Kaliev out, and then you've got Cam Talbot and Phoenix Copley as the goalies. This is a team that's vulnerable. They haven't had the best start. They're 0-1-1. So, just 1 point out of 2 games, not great so far, but still a team that can put some hurt against the Jets. I don't think Winnipeg should sleep on them. So, the Jets should absolutely take them seriously. They should be prepared for a fight. And I would expect that there could even be some post-whistle scrums with Dubois, because I think a lot of the players probably have at least a little bit of an edge for this game. I'm sure Dubois will be chippy himself, wanting to prove something to Jets fans and to the Kings that, signed him. And I'm just expecting a fun game. I think that's the theme I'm getting so far from the season, is that Winnipeg in these games is going to be pretty fun. But I still think at the end of the day, they're the better team, and they should come out with the victory. Now, speaking of winning things and stuff involving the Kings, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about who won the trade, because I think that's a bigger question, and I think the usual logic around this deal perhaps doesn't hold up as well as some might suggest. We'll talk about, who the real winner is in just a little bit, but before we go any further, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Sleeper. Mark Scheifele scores a hat trick, the Winnipeg Jets win a Stanley Cup, and you win 100 times your bet that you placed at Daily Fantasy Hockey. Well, all of these scenarios are possible, right? But if you want to make them a reality, you got to start playing Daily Fantasy Hockey with Sleeper. They are the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network, and also our top choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. They have all the sorts of player tracking and team tracking that you could possibly want, and focus on everything from goals, assists, saves, and so much more. Whether you're trying to make the most of a defensive specialist in somebody like, say, Cole Perfetti, or a pure goal scorer like Mark Scheifele, or even a legendary finisher like Crosby or Ovechkin, Sleeper is here to give you huge payouts, and they want you to have fun. So if you're ready to get started, use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you for joining us in tonight's episode as we talk about a big question on everybody's lips, one that's kind of floated around a little bit, but I don't know that anyone has necessarily sat down and tackled it, just because usually when you ask this question, who wins a trade, right? That question has a before and kind of an after. Now, the retrospective is always a really tough one, because it doesn't really work as a question since you have to evaluate a trade when it happens. But what I'll say is this. What I said when the trade happened is pretty much what has panned out. I thought Winnipeg won this deal by a landslide when they got Velarde and Iafallo and Kupari for Dubois. Now, you might say, well, usually the team that wins is the one that gets the best player. And that is correct. In a way, usually the team that gets the best player wins a trade. Here's where I think that assessment doesn't really hold up. For me, when the Jets traded for Velarde, I was very high on Gabe. I thought that he'd be exactly what the Jets needed. I thought that he would perhaps be an even better, more well-rounded player than Dubois is without really sacrificing the scoring touch that made Dubois so lethal. And so far, Dubois hasn't scored yet. He doesn't even have a point. Velarde has not scored himself, but has really been putting in some nice defensive shifts and really helping Scheifele kind of manage Connor. So I gotta say, for what the Jets needed, I think Velarde has been a bit of a blessed find. But if that was just the trade by itself, I think it would have been fine enough. Obviously, the big question with Velarde is, will he stay long term? And I don't know that we have as much insight to that yet, right? He's extended, short term, like a 2-year deal. So obviously the Jets are going to have to pay up here in a couple seasons. But for the time that Winnipeg has him, he's still going to be an absolute menace as a top 6 threat. But where I think he's really going to be awesome is his passing, his playmaking, and his defensive work. I think we saw that early. I think we've seen him really work hard on his shifts. And so long as he stays healthy, I think he has the potential to become a big fan favorite for Jets fans. But like I said, if it was just Velarde, that'd have been cool. Adding in Iafallo and Kupari as your toss-ins is just sick, right? Obviously for the Kings, their main objective was to consolidate roster spots and clear cap space. So in a lot of ways, they had to dump Iafallo. And Iafallo, look, I'll say this, right? He is a little expensive given what his level of production has been. But the thing with Alex is that he's such a skilled player playing in a middle 6 role. It's kind of like having a bit of a... Apologies, folks, we had a slight interruption. As I was just saying, Alex Iafallo was one of the guys who, was a very talented player, but maybe somebody who, for the price tag, was a little expensive and just didn't fit with LA's overall picture. But make no mistake, for the Jets, he has been an immediate upgrade. He's already scored a beautiful tipped goal. And I'm excited to see what he can do. I think on a line with Lowry and Appleton, this is a great fit. And who, of course, can forget the throw-in of Kupari? Now, Kupari was one of those guys that I said was a sleeper guy, a sleeper pick for perhaps a breakout candidate. Maybe not in terms of like a huge scoring output, but as somebody who would be a really good role player for the Jets. Remember, last year we had Kevin Stenlund, and look, Stenlund did a pretty solid job. He was defensively responsible, and he occasionally had some pretty soft hands. But I think we all know what we expected out of him, and it wasn't to be a versatile two-way player. It was a guy who'd be a more physical, defensive-oriented player who occasionally might score a goal once every 5 months, but you wouldn't really expect a lot from him. With Kupari, I think that there's untapped potential, and that potential could be pretty darn decent, maybe even like a third-line kind of player. His skating so far has looked effortless. His two-way play has been very good. His ability to drive the slot and attack the goalie is great. I think that he is a super good player, and he's already getting chemistry with Barron and Nemesnikov. So all I can say is, when you look at all of the parts of this trade and how it all came about and the circumstances that the Jets faced and how they worked their way out of it, I think Winnipeg really won this trade. And I felt that way on day one. When I saw the whole trade package was Velarde, Iafallo, and Kupari, I was kind of shocked. I mean, I know that some of those guys might not really be impressive to other players or teams, right? But I'm telling you, for what the Jets needed and for how they have completely changed Winnipeg's lineup, that was a windfall, basically, of talent and skill. And of course, Iafallo might not be long for the Jets. I don't know if they'll extend him after his current contract runs out, but I think Kupari and Velarde for sure are going to figure long-term for the Jets, so long as everything goes according to plan. I think Winnipeg does need to win a few more games and kind of show both Kupari and Velarde that there's a real will to win here, but I think doing so, with a big Hellebuck and Scheifele extension right as these LA kids arrive is a step in the right direction to proving that the Jets are serious. Now, whether that direction is maybe the best choice, you could debate that. I think that there are certainly conversations about whether or not the Jets should have gone that route, but for my take, I think it's fine. I think Winnipeg is going to do what it does anyways and really try to compete. But, with the kinds of contracts that they handed out to both players, I'm pretty okay with the cap hits and how much the Jets are paying. So, yeah, color me relatively excited about it. But, in terms of the Dubois trade and the aftermath, I really feel like Winnipeg has completely changed its outlook with this deal. It's one of the rare trades that I would say really benefited the Jets by a country a country mile, right? This has been perhaps one of the most transformative trades since the Evander Kane deal. And we all know how the Evander Kane deal ended up. Pretty good for the Jets, if we're being honest. Obviously, Myers and Stafford played pretty pivotal roles for the Jets at times. Maybe they weren't the best players ever, but when you were trying to have that initial 2015 playoff run, both had some really important moments for Winnipeg. So a lot to like. I think this trade's going to age even better, and let's hope that extensions for both players are in the future. Now, one thing I did mention just a little bit ago was talking about the idea of being committed to winning. And that's where I think the Jets have a really good opportunity this year to do something that they really don't often do, and that's truly go for it. We'll talk about what that might entail for the Jets and how they can really turn this team into a juggernaut in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride running at all times. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. No matter what you're into, speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 billion parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that the part you pick up is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your vehicle alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Check out eBay Motors right now. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts of tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Everydayers, thank you for rejoining us on these final thoughts as we talk about a big question that I think is perhaps early to be asking, especially with the fact that Winnipeg is yet to really accrue cap space, right? But let's talk about it anyways, because it's going to come up before you realize it, and that is going for it. The Jets have basically signaled already that they're intending to be competitive for the next couple of years. They've talked about it on numerous occasions, and now I think we've seen the first real demonstration that they're actually serious about it. Signing Hellebuck and Scheifele for 7 years apiece at $8.5 million is probably the clearest statement of intent I can imagine. Now, I know that there are plenty of people who have been detractors for these deals, and I'm not going to say that they're entirely wrong, because they're not. I think that there is actually pretty valid concern about the time frame of everything, right? Because traditionally the Jets, when they do something like this, they have struggled to follow it up with supporting actions that really show this team is serious about winning. But maybe, with declining ticket sales, apparently there were like 2,000 seats available at the home opener the other night. Maybe this is kind of the impetus to push this team forward and get fans back in the stands. Because I think if you have a winning franchise and you start to really show that you're dedicated to winning and that you're willing to invest the resources, maybe the fans will invest in the team as well. I think that's a thing that we haven't seen in some time. And if this season really starts off successfully and starts getting fans back into it, I think the mood around Winnipeg is really going to change. It's going to feel like the city has finally gotten an airport. Sorry if you don't get that niche joke. But long and short of it is, the Jets need to acquire and make some trades, sending players the other way, right? I think one of the big upgrades that you look at the forward core is, perhaps finding somebody who can fill in for Mason Appleton. Appleton has been a mainstay for this club for some time, and while, we very much appreciate his service and all, I think we know that, where he was and what he was projected to be, what we had hoped him to be, and kind of what he's become over the past few years, all of those things have kind of diverged. I was hoping that he'd be kind of like an Andrew Kopp light, and unfortunately that really hasn't happened. He's not been bad, and in fact, this year he's been pretty okay so far for his couple of games, but I think with what you're looking for from Appleton, you might want to search outside of the Jets, right? Connor Garland, I think, is a name that's starting to get more popular. I think he would be a really ideal upgrade because he's got a great shot, he's very physical, and he creates space for himself and can really improve the usage of space for his line mates. So that's a guy that I think would immediately fit into the Jets. I think he'd immediately upgrade the top 9. And he's also one of those players where if you have an injury crisis, he can play elevated minutes and actually thrive in those roles. So if the Jets want to get really deep, not only is Garland a great rental, but he's also got a couple more years on his deal, which means you keep him around for this competitive window. Because I'd say for the Jets, the next 3 to 4 years is it. That's their window. That's what they've basically set down. And then after that, you're probably going to see Hellebuck and Scheifele really slowing down. But as far as the Jets are concerned, that's when you're going to start to see more and more of those prospects filling in and taking elevated roles and perhaps pushing some of the veterans further down the roster, right? That's kind of like the hope and dream. As far as other moves the Jets need to make, I've talked about it ad nauseum. The defense really needs an upgrade. I think that is where the Jets most likely want to make an acquisition along with the departure. The acquisition can kind of be internal, right? If you get one of Heinola or Chisholm playing over one of the existing veterans, that would probably give the Jets a boost on the back end, especially offensively. But moving one of these deals, I think, is going to be really hard. Schmidt's got a lot of cap hit, which for a team that's maybe not as worried about real cash being paid out, maybe it's not as big of a deal. But I think for, most teams that would facilitate this kind of trade, you'd have to pay them to do it. And I think that's where the Jets have traditionally been a little bit, not so fond of that. And paying other teams to take on your bad contracts is not really a great use of assets. Usually it's only helpful when you can actually use that space and do something with it, because otherwise you're just burning picks. With the Jets, though, this year, I think that there's a real chance to move that salary and, again, turn it into a player like Garland. If you were to repurpose and recapture that cap space for usage, I think that is a great and very savvy move, and it's probably something that the Jets have been thinking about for the past several months. It's just the market's probably not great, and I imagine that there's not a ton of teams out there lining up to take on Nate's cap hit. So for Winnipeg, obviously, this is a momentous season, one with a lot of promise, one with a lot of uncertainty, but so far, so good. And I think that is why, for me, you got to go all in. You've already cashed in your chips with Scheifele and Hellebuck. This is the season to really make the most of it, because after this year, you're looking at more expiring contracts. Connor and Ehlers are going to be due up for extensions, and I don't really know how that's going to go. Ehlers could be a 50-50 for me, right? I love him, but I do worry that, he's going to want something that's not going to make a lot of sense for the Jets, perhaps. And honestly, with his injury history, it's tough to say if the Jets really want to commit to a guy who's getting closer and closer to 30. For my money, yes, I really want him back, and I would be kind of crushed if he doesn't get extended, but I also would not be shocked. He might want to find greener pastures elsewhere, and I understand that. But let's hope that it doesn't come to that, and that there's a reasonable agreement that both sides can reach before his deal runs out. With Connor, it's a tougher question. I love KFC when he's scoring goals, and I don't love when he's not scoring goals. So that is a harder thing to figure out. I've talked about it in older episodes about, whether his future in Winnipeg makes a lot of sense. But for the time being, you definitely want to keep him for this competitive window. He's got a great shot. He's excellent at one-on-ones, and that's really what you want out of him going forward. So all that to say, the Jets really need to get creative, because they have most of the foundation in place for a true contender. It's just a few tweaks and moves, especially on the back end, that I think would push this team from being a challenger to a true out-and-out contender. So let me know what you would do with this roster. How would you shape it and change it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow for thoughts on the Kings game, and go Jets, go.